Welcome to the inner cosmos. You are about to embark on a journey into the hidden universe of networked machinery that churns beneath your dashing good looks. This book is an exploration of the profound recognition that almost everything we do, think and feel is not under our conscious control. Your conscious mind, the I that wakes up in the morning, is merely a tiny stowaway on a transatlantic steamship, taking credit for the journey without acknowledging the massive engineering underfoot. By venturing into the secret lives of the brain, we fall from the center of ourselves, shedding certainty and egocentrism to discover a much more splendid and awe-inspiring reality of how we operate, decide, and exist. Chapter 1. There's someone in my head, but it's not me. When you stare into a mirror, you are looking at a masterpiece of hidden engineering. Beneath your skin lies a hidden cosmos of interlocking bones, humming organs, and a dense fabric of muscle. But the true marvel sits quietly within the dark vault of your skull, a 3-pound universe of tissue known as the brain. It is the most intricate piece of matter we have ever encountered, composed of hundreds of billions of microscopic cells called neurons, each bustling like an entire metropolis. Every second, these cells fire trillions of electrical pulses, creating a network of communication so vast and bewildering that human language fails to adequately capture it. Yet, the most astounding revelation drawn from peering into this biological machinery is a humbling one. The conscious self, the identity that wakes up, sips coffee and recognizes its own reflection, is not the captain of the ship. Instead, your conscious mind is merely a stowaway on a massive transatlantic vessel, blissfully taking credit for the complex navigation happening entirely out of its view. For a long time, the physical nature of our inner world was difficult to grasp, much like the recording of sound was once seen as an impossible feat. When audio recording devices were first brought to remote parts of the world, people were terrified. A voice, after all, feels invisible and weightless. How could a machine capture it? It seemed like profound sorcery to pull spoken words from the air and replay them at will. Our thoughts give us the exact same illusion. An idea or an emotion feels untethered to the physical world, floating free like a feather on the breeze. Yet thoughts have a very real, physical foundation. If you alter the chemical environment of your brain with alcohol or caffeine, your thoughts shift entirely. If you sustain an injury to a finger, your mind remains intact. However, if you damage even a tiny fraction of brain tissue, you might lose the ability to recognize animals, understand melody, or perceive colors. Our grandest aspirations, our deepest loves, and our sharpest jokes all emanate from this biological network. The truth is that the vast majority of our mental life is governed by automated programs functioning perfectly without our conscious awareness. Consider the simple act of finding someone attractive. Studies have shown that subtle physical cues, such as a slight widening of the pupils which indicates sexual readiness, can make a face appear far more appealing to an observer. Yet the person feeling the attraction has no idea why. Their deeper neural networks recognize the biological signal, while their conscious mind merely experienced a vague magnetic pull. Similarly, complex physical feats, such as hitting a baseball traveling at over 100 miles per hour, happen far too quickly for conscious deliberation. By the time your conscious mind realizes the ball has been pitched, your body has already reacted, calculated the trajectory, and swung the bat. Ideas themselves often emerge fully formed from the darkness of the unconscious. History is filled with brilliant thinkers, from mathematicians to poets, who confessed that their greatest breakthroughs simply arrived in their minds seemingly unbidden. Their neural circuitry had been quietly assembling the pieces behind the scenes, only delivering the final product to the conscious self when the heavy lifting was done. This profound shift in understanding is not without precedent. Centuries ago, humanity believed the Earth sat firmly at the absolute center of the universe. When early astronomers first raised their rudimentary telescopes and observed moons orbiting other planets, the realization was catastrophic for the ego of our species. We were displaced, relegated to a speck of rock drifting through a breathtakingly immense cosmos. For many, this demotion was terrifying, and some individuals were even persecuted for daring to suggest that we were not the focal point of creation. Yet this loss of centrality ultimately opened our eyes to a universe far more magnificent and awe-inspiring than our ancestors could have ever dreamed. Today, We are undergoing a similar, deeply personal revolution. We are being dethroned from the center of our own minds. The journey toward this inner discovery began quietly. Early philosophers and theologians occasionally noted that humans perform many actions without deliberate thought, from tapping a foot to a rhythm to bursting into sudden laughter. As the centuries passed, pioneering thinkers began to suspect that our accessible thoughts were only a fraction of the story. They proposed that imperceptible ideas and unconscious desires might be the true drivers of human behavior. By the 19th century, early scientists began measuring the speed of thought, discovering that different types of mental tasks required measurable fractions of a second to compute. The realization was revolutionary. Thought was not magic. It was the product of a biological machine cranking through its gears. This mechanical view of the mind culminated in the recognition that human behavior could be driven by submerged depths of experience. Just as the towering tip of an iceberg implies a much larger invisible mass lurking beneath the frigid water, our conscious life is supported by an unseen subterranean world. Slips of the tongue, the bizarre landscapes of dreams and inexplicable phobias were suddenly recognized as echoes from the hidden machinery. Although modern neuroscience now utilizes advanced brain imaging technologies rather than the purely conversational methods of early psychology, the core revelation remains untouched. We are strangers to ourselves. We are not at the center of the action. As we prepare to venture deeper into this inner cosmos, we will uncover just how much of our reality, our decisions, and our identities are shaped in the shadowy, inaccessible depths of our own minds. Chapter 2. The Testimony of the Senses. What is experience really like? We move through the world under the persistent impression that our eyes function like high-definition cameras, capturing a raw, uninterrupted stream of reality. We believe that what we see is a direct transmission of the world outside, presented faithfully to our awareness. Yet the truth is far more mysterious. The brain is locked in a dark, silent vault, shielded from the light and sound that define our experience. It receives only crude pulses of electrochemical energy, data streams that carry no inherent meaning. The colors, textures, sounds, and scents that compose our reality are not things we find in the world. They are constructions we assemble within the darkness of the skull. Experience is not an objective recording, but an active internal narrative manufactured by the brain, stitched together from incomplete signals and filtered through the lens of expectation. When you open your eyes, you are not simply receiving visual input, you are performing an act of intense interpretation. The sensory data hitting the retinas is riddled with gaps and ambiguities. There are blind spots where the optic nerve meets the eye, and the clarity of your vision is limited to a tiny central region, yet you perceive a seamless, high-resolution panorama. The brain fills in these holes with remarkable speed, projecting a consistent world that feels solid and whole. It relies on a lifetime of learned associations to guess what belongs in the frame, treating perception as a set of logical inferences rather than a passive reception of truth. If the brain were forced to interpret every scrap of incoming data from scratch, we would be paralyzed by the sheer volume of information. Instead, it relies on a sophisticated system of assumptions, effectively hallucinating a version of reality that is functional enough to keep us alive. This reality-building process becomes startlingly evident when we consider how the brain handles motion and orientation. Consider the classic illusion of the stationary traveler. If you sit on a train and see the car next to you begin to move, there is a brief, disorienting moment where you cannot tell if you are pulling forward or if your neighbor is drifting back. Your brain is scrambling to anchor itself to a stable frame of reference, processing cues about gravity, friction, and visual flow. It is a reminder that what we call reality is often just a struggle to resolve conflicting sensory inputs. If you were to walk through the world while wearing goggles that inverted your entire field of vision, the world would initially feel impossible to navigate. Yet after a few days, the brain would adapt, remapping the visual field so that your internal representation once again matches your physical actions. The sensory truth is malleable. It is a flexible model, subject to recalibration. The brain is constantly running this internal simulation, maintaining a version of the world that exists largely independent of external input. We can observe this in the way we dream, where the brain generates vivid, immersive experiences entirely without sensory data from the eyes or ears. Even while we are awake, the vast majority of our visual experience is driven by top-down expectations rather than bottom-up input. We see what we expect to see. This is why a person who loses their sight can experience Charles Bonnet syndrome, where the brain, deprived of its usual data, begins to conjure complex, vivid hallucinations. The creative machinery continues to run, spinning narratives out of thin air because the brain is inherently an engine of projection. This leads to a profound question about the nature of time itself. We have the distinct feeling that we exist in the now, but our perception of the present is an illusion. It takes a significant amount of time for the brain to process incoming sensory information, compare it to past experiences, and integrate it into a coherent conscious stream. By the time you consciously register that a sound has occurred, or that a touch has brushed against your arm, the event has already passed. We are living in a slight delay, a buffered playback that allows the brain to synchronize disparate signals into a unified story. We are not experiencing the world exactly as it happens. We are experiencing a processed, filtered summary of the immediate past. Our senses are not windows into the world. They are the filters through which we construct our own subjective Umwelt or environment. We perceive only the narrow slice of reality that our biology permits, leaving the vast majority of the electromagnetic spectrum and the acoustic environment entirely invisible to us. What we identify as the world is simply the specific, localized reality that our neural architecture is evolved to track. Behind the curtain, the brain is constantly weaving these threads of raw data into the rich, colorful tapestry of existence, working tirelessly to provide us with the illusion of an objective reality. We are the architects of our own experience, forever living in a mental simulation of a world that remains fundamentally out of reach. Chapter 3. Mind, the Gap. If the brain is a factory of automated processes, we must ask, where does the conscious I actually reside? We navigate our lives feeling as though we are in control of our intentions, but the reality of human behavior suggests a profound gap between what we do and why we think we are doing it. Consider the way we master new skills. When you first learn to drive a car or play a musical instrument, the process is agonizingly slow and deliberate. You must consciously monitor every movement, where your feet are placed, how you angle your wrists, the precise timing of a gear shift. This requires immense mental energy and focus. However, with repetition, this conscious burden fades away. The complex sequence of actions is slowly offloaded from the conscious mind to the lower, more efficient centers of the brain. Eventually, the task becomes automatic, performed with fluid precision without you ever needing to think about it. This is the hallmark of human expertise, the ability to burn behaviors into our neural circuitry, freeing the conscious mind to move on to the next challenge. This process of shifting from conscious effort to automatic performance is not limited to simple muscle memory. It governs a vast array of social and psychological behaviors. Think of the specialized workers in the poultry industry known as chicken sexers. These individuals are tasked with the rapid-fire job of determining the sex of a day-old chick, a task that involves identifying subtle anatomical differences that are practically invisible to the untrained eye. It is an incredibly difficult skill to teach. Instructors often find they cannot explain the criteria they use because they aren't consciously aware of them. They have simply learned to see the difference through thousands of repetitions. Their brains have developed a subconscious pattern recognition system that functions far beyond the speed and resolution of their own conscious awareness. The same phenomenon appears in expert plane spotters who can identify aircraft models in a fraction of a second, even when the visual evidence seems insufficient to a novice. The implications of this gap between consciousness and behavior extend into our social and moral lives. Research into implicit bias reveals that many of our preferences and prejudices operate deep below the surface of our awareness. You may genuinely believe you are an egalitarian, yet your brain's rapid response systems, shaped by years of environmental conditioning and societal tropes, might hold entirely different associations. These hidden attitudes affect how we interact with others, whom we trust, and how we interpret the actions of those around us, all before we have even had a chance to apply a conscious filter. We are often oblivious to the true hidden currents driving our interpersonal judgments. This invisibility of the machinery applies even to the way we experience affection and attraction. In experiments designed to measure subconscious preferences, such as those involving letter-name effects, researchers found that people tend to have a subtle unconscious affinity for things that share initials with their own names. The brain, in its constant search for self-referential patterns, creates these invisible links that influence our decisions in ways we would never consciously choose to admit. These aren't deep-seated character flaws, they are simply the way the brain works. It is a biological device optimized for efficiency, constantly scanning the environment for patterns and burning them into the subcortical machinery to save time and energy. Even when we feel we are making a hunch or a gut decision, we are rarely aware of the massive amount of data crunching occurring behind the curtain. A person who suddenly decides to move to a new city or buy a certain product may describe it as a gut feeling. In reality, this is the final output of an intricate neural calculation, where the brain has weighed thousands of past experiences, current stresses, and environmental cues to arrive at a conclusion. The feeling of intuition is simply the brain's way of delivering a decision without letting you in on the laborious process it took to get there. The pinnacle of this efficiency is the brain's ability to act as a seamless, high-performance machine in competitive environments. Consider a professional tennis player returning a serve traveling at speeds that make it physically impossible for the conscious mind to track the ball and plan a response. The player's brain has internalized the physics of the game, the trajectory of the ball, and the habitual patterns of the opponent. The movement is not a result of deliberation, it is a manifestation of ingrained, specialized circuitry. By the time the player thinks they have swung the racket, the match is already over. The brain, acting as a team of systems working in parallel, has solved the problem long before the conscious awareness could even perceive the challenge. This is the mantra of the brain. If you want to be fast, if you want to be efficient, burn the job into the hardware. By automating the routine, the brain ensures survival and mastery, leaving us to navigate the world with the strange, unshakable feeling that we are the ones steering the ship. Chapter 4. The kinds of thoughts that are thinkable. The architecture of our brain is not a blank slate waiting to be written upon. It is a highly structured, biologically constrained machine. We often flatter ourselves with the idea that our minds are capable of conceiving anything, but in reality, our thoughts are tethered to the specific configuration of our neural pathways. Just as a bat cannot perceive the world through the same spectrum of light that a human does, and a human cannot naturally comprehend the complexities of the world through the sonar-based navigation of a bat, our own thinking is limited by the biological equipment we possess. The types of thoughts we are capable of having are strictly dictated by the evolutionary history of the hardware that produces them. This constraint is most visible in the ways our brains are hardwired for social survival. Humans are intensely social creatures, and our brains have evolved specialized modules to navigate the complexities of group dynamics, hierarchy, and reputation. We are built with an innate tendency to divide the world into us and them, a mental shortcut that served our ancestors well in small competitive bands but creates significant friction in our modern globalized society. We find it intuitive to care deeply about members of our immediate tribe while remaining relatively indifferent to the suffering of those outside our circle. This is not a personal moral failure, it is a manifestation of the social cognitive circuitry that was forged in the crucible of our evolutionary past. Our cognitive horizons are also limited by the Umgebung, the immediate surrounding environment that our brain is built to track. We are fundamentally limited in how much information we can hold in conscious awareness at any given moment, and the brain compensates for this by ignoring the vast majority of what is happening around us. We are blind to the mechanics of our own existence because, for the sake of survival, it is more important to know if a predator is nearby than to understand the complex chemical signaling occurring in our prefrontal cortex. This tunnel vision is a feature, not a bug. It allows the brain to filter out the noise and focus on the signals that historically mattered most for our survival and reproduction. Moreover, the thinkability of our thoughts is shaped by the way our brain categorizes the world. We are pattern-matching machines, constantly seeking to fit new information into pre-existing mental frames. This is why we are so prone to cognitive biases. We are not objective observers of the world, but rather active participants in a process of confirmation. If we believe a certain outcome is likely, our brain will actively hunt for evidence to support that belief, effectively hiding counter-evidence from our conscious awareness. This helps maintain a stable, predictable narrative, but it also creates blind spots where alternative ways of viewing reality become literally unthinkable. Ultimately, the human mind is a prisoner of its own design. We are trapped within a skull, attempting to understand the universe through a processor that was tuned to gather berries, track game, and navigate the treacherous politics of small group social life. This does not mean our capacity for knowledge is fixed, but it does mean that our biological nature sets the parameters. We are capable of profound scientific insight and abstract philosophical reasoning, yet these abilities are built on top of ancient, instinctual layers that still exert a massive pull on our conscious life. We can only explore as far as our neural landscape permits, and recognizing those limits is the first step toward true self-awareness. We are not just thinking, we are thinking with a specific kind of biological machine, and the nature of the machine determines the shape of the thought. Chapter 5. The brain is a team of rivals. If you look at the brain from the outside, it appears to be a single unified organ. However, if you examine its internal operations, you discover that it is a fractured landscape, a sprawling, noisy, and often chaotic committee of competing subsystems. The idea of the self as a singular commander is a persistent illusion. In reality, your brain is a team of rivals, a collection of independent neural networks that are constantly battling for control over your behavior. At any given moment, your actions are the final tally of an internal negotiation between different parts of the brain that have conflicting goals, desires, and perspectives. This constant tug-of-war is most visible in the tension between our emotional and rational systems. One network, often associated with the older limbic regions, seeks immediate gratification, avoiding pain and craving short-term rewards. Another network, primarily residing in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that evolved more recently, is concerned with long-term goals, social standing, and future consequences. Your experience of temptation is actually the subjective feeling of this conflict. When you debate whether to eat a piece of cake while trying to stay on a diet, you are not wrestling with a moral choice. You're observing the competition between two different neural programs. The cake-seeking circuit wants to maximize calorie intake for survival, while the long-term planning circuit wants to maintain your health and social status. Whichever network manages to seize the steering wheel at that moment determines your action. This team of rivals concept extends far beyond just impulse control. Different parts of your brain hold different, sometimes contradictory, beliefs about the world. You might consciously believe that you are a rational, objective person, while simultaneously harboring deep-seated fears or biases that influence your decision-making in ways you cannot articulate. This is not because you are being dishonest, it is because your self is a coalition of many different minds. Each subsystem has its own sensors, its own objectives, and its own memories. They often operate in parallel, and your conscious awareness is just the observer that arrives at the final result, often retroactively rationalizing why the winning side was the one you wanted all along. The implications of this structure are profound for how we reinvent ourselves. Because there is no single I in charge, we can strategically use our own biology to manage our behavior. This is the essence of what is often called a Ulysses contract, a way of binding your future self to a decision your present self makes, because you know your future brain might be hijacked by a different impulsive subsystem. By placing obstacles in the path of your weaker impulses, you aren't fighting yourself. You are simply managing the committee. You are recognizing that you are not a static entity, but a dynamic, changing system that can be influenced by the structure you impose on your environment. This model of the brain also helps explain the phenomenon of cognitive dissonance. When we hold two contradictory ideas, we feel psychological discomfort. We work tirelessly to resolve this tension, not because we are inherently logical, but because the brain is a system designed to maintain coherence in its internal model of the world. It must integrate the competing outputs of its various subsystems into a single, cohesive narrative. If the internal conflict becomes too great, the brain will go to great lengths, including self-deception, to smooth over the cracks and ensure the story it tells itself remains consistent. We are not just thinking beings, we are storytelling machines, constantly reauthoring the history of our actions to preserve the illusion of a unified self. Chapter 6. Why blameworthiness is the wrong question. Our legal and moral systems are built upon a foundational assumption: the existence of free will. We operate under the belief that individuals are entirely responsible for their actions because they are the sole authors of their decisions. We punish the criminal and praise the hero because we assume they could have chosen otherwise. Yet, neuroscience presents a profound challenge to this bedrock of civilization. When we look beneath the surface of the human mind, we find a complex interplay of genetics, environment, neurobiology, and developmental history, factors that are entirely beyond an individual's control. If a person commits a crime, it is not merely the result of a bad choice, it is often the output of a brain influenced by a tumor, a chemical imbalance, or a lifetime of neural conditioning that renders certain behaviors far more probable than others. Consider the case of individuals who suffer from brain damage and undergo a dramatic shift in personality or impulse control. There are documented accounts of formerly law-abiding citizens who, following the growth of a brain tumor, began to exhibit impulsive, violent, or socially unacceptable behaviors. Once the tumor was surgically removed, their personality and behavior returned to normal. In these instances, it is clear that the person's self was essentially held hostage by the physical state of their neural circuitry. If their actions were governed by their biology in that moment, at what point does choice enter the picture? We readily accept that a person with a neurological disorder like Tourette's syndrome is not responsible for their involuntary tics, but we struggle to apply that same level of understanding to more complex behaviors. The problem with the concept of blameworthiness is that it relies on an outdated binary view of the brain. It assumes a sharp divide between the rational, choosing self and the biological machine. However, there is no such divide. The rational self is simply a product of the machine. When we judge someone, we are ignoring the reality that their brain is an accumulation of variables, their genetic predispositions, the neural pathways reinforced during their childhood, and the physical state of their brain chemistry in the moment of action. We do not hold a person responsible for their height, their IQ, or the color of their eyes. Why, then, do we hold them responsible for the neurobiological architecture that dictates their impulse control and decision-making capacity? This shift in perspective is not intended to excuse destructive behavior, but rather to change our approach to justice. If we move away from the retributive model of punishment for the sake of suffering and toward a more constructive model of rehabilitation and management, we can create a system that is both more humane and more effective. Instead of focusing on blame, we should focus on understanding the underlying biological drivers of the behavior. By identifying the specific neural deficits or environmental triggers involved, we can design interventions that are tailored to the individual. This might involve pharmacological treatment, neurorehabilitation, or cognitive restructuring designed to strengthen the weak points in their neural team of rivals. Ultimately, our insistence on blame serves our social need for retribution more than it serves the goal of creating a safer society. As we gain a deeper, more sophisticated understanding of the brain, we will eventually be forced to confront the reality that our legal and moral frameworks must evolve. We will have to move past the simple, comforting illusion that we are masters of our destiny and instead embrace the more complex, humbling reality that we are biological systems shaped by forces we barely perceive. Recognizing that blame is a scientifically flimsy concept is not a retreat from morality. It is an advancement toward a more enlightened, evidence-based approach to the human condition. Chapter 7. Life after the monarchy. We stand at the precipice of a new era of self-understanding. The realization that we are not the commanders of our own internal vessel is the most significant dethronement in the history of human thought. We have spent centuries placing the conscious mind on a pedestal, viewing it as the sole source of our dignity, our morality, and our agency. Yet, the more we learn about the hidden machinery of the brain, the more we must abandon the myth of the monarchy. There is no king in the control room. there is only the vast churning democracy of the neural network, an intricate society of competing programs that rise and fall in influence, shaping our reality from the shadows. This transition from monarchy to democracy is not a loss, it is an evolution. When we stop clinging to the illusion of total control, we gain something far more valuable, the ability to work with our biology rather than against it. Knowing that we are composed of shifting, rival systems allows us to become architects of our own lives. We can implement our own Ulysses contracts, designing our environment, our social structures, and our habits to tilt the balance of our neural competition in favor of our long-term goals. We stop being victims of our own impulses and start becoming savvy managers of our internal team. The process of knowing thyself takes on a deeper meaning in this new light. It is no longer about introspecting in search of a hidden, authentic core. It is about mapping the terrain of our automated processes. It means recognizing our biases, our triggers, and the limitations of our sensory and cognitive machinery. It means being humble about our capacity for objectivity and cautious about our certainty. When we look at ourselves through the lens of neuroscience, we see the beauty of the mechanism, the staggering complexity of a system that allows us to perceive, feel, and act, all while we remain largely oblivious to the monumental labor happening under the hood. This is the great frontier of the future. We are no longer limited to the crude tools of the past, shame, willpower, and naive faith in the supremacy of reason. We have the potential to use our knowledge of the brain to improve our legal systems, to enhance our educational strategies, and to foster more empathy in our social interactions. By accepting our biological nature, we free ourselves from the crushing weight of believing that we must be perfect, consistent, and fully transparent to ourselves at all times. The story of the brain is not a tale of a finished product, it is an ongoing, adaptive project. We are the inheritors of an ancient, brilliant machine that is constantly evolving, constantly learning, and constantly negotiating its place in the world. To embrace our inner landscape is to embrace the full scope of what it means to be human. A creature that is at once a biological machine and the conscious observer of its own mystery. We are the stewards of this hidden cosmos, tasked with the incredible privilege of exploring the dark, secret lives that make us who we are. The monarchy is gone, and in its place the vast, mysterious, and ultimately magnificent democracy of the mind stands revealed.